For Lent, I have decided to provide you with short messages that will hopefully inform and inspire you in this season of preparation, penitence, and reflection. Since this tends to be a time that many of us think about spiritual practices, I decided it would be worthwhile to look at a different practice each week as my topic. For this first week, I want us to think about fasting. Why would I choose fasting? For at least two reasons. The first is that this is probably the practice we most readily associate with Lent. Giving up something for Lent is really pretty common, even among some folks who aren't regular churchgoers. The second reason is that, despite its common association with Lent, in the modern world fasting can seem strange. To some it might seem masochistic, like a kind of mild self-harm. So I'll start by clarifying what I mean by fasting, and then turn to what I think its significance is. Fasting means abstaining from consumption for a time. Historically, this usually meant food rather than drink, and it did not always mean total abstention. Giving up meat, dairy, and or wine, for instance, could count as a form of fasting. There are a couple infamous stories from the days of the early church in which zealous Christians went overboard with their fasting and hurt themselves, creating a scandal for the spiritual directors who seemed to have allowed for this kind of behavior. This is not what the practice is meant to be. Fasting is temporary abstention that tends to create mild discomfort. It is not self-starvation. Fasting was far more common amongst Christians in the first several centuries of the faith than it tends to be today. In writings from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christians were already assuming regular days of fasting, leading up to Easter, of course, like we're doing, but also on regular days of the week. Some Christians fasted on Saturday in preparation for Sunday worship. Others on Wednesdays and Fridays. And even before these regular days of fasting started becoming common, fasting was clearly already part of Christian practice. You can get a sense of this even in the New Testament. In addition to fasting being a part of several stories in the Gospels and the book of Acts, we have Jesus' words in Matthew 6:16. And when you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. The warning here is pretty clear, and I'm not going to spend any time on it. Instead, I want to focus on the opening few words. And when you fast. When you fast is a revealing statement. Jesus expects that his disciples, at least sometimes, will fast. He doesn't here say exactly when or how or for how long, but Jesus is clearly implying that fasting is something disciples do. So now I want to ask the question that has probably occurred to many of you. Sure, fasting is something Christians have historically done, but why? What is its purpose, and what does it mean? Well, like with any rich and meaningful spiritual practice, there isn't likely to be a single simple answer. Why do we pray, for instance? There's a lot of reasons. It would be a profound oversimplification to try to give a single reason or meaning to prayer. The same is true of fasting. Thus, I'm not going to exhaust the meaning of fasting here in the next minute or so, but I will give a few suggestions. Fasting makes us aware of our mortality and our creatureliness. In a visceral, personal, embodied way, we remember that we are dependent on God when we fast. That feeling of desire for a food we've given up, or for food at all if we've given up eating anything for a time, is a feeling that reminds us that we are not self-sufficient. Fasting also creates space for attention on God and what God has for us. There was a Christian writing popular in the 2nd century called The Shepherd of Hermas, in which the following suggestion is made. Fast 1 day a week, eating only bread and water, the author suggests. Then he goes on, use the money you saved by fasting to give to the needy. The Shepherd of Hermas is suggesting that the process of abstaining gives us freedom to commit additional resources and time. This leads to my exhortation to you. This Lent, fast. I don't think this has to be some major feat of holiness and discipline. I don't think it has to mean completely not eating for a day. In fact, for some of us, there might be important health reasons not to do that. Instead, think of fasting as an act of abstaining from something that is not strictly necessary. And when you abstain from this something, use the discomfort as a reminder of who you are and who God is. And whatever time or resources are opened up by this abstention, use it.